The Venerable says to his students, "Close your eyes and listen to my stories as a fairy tale or as a dream." Tony Swung, a top-level Apple engineer, submitted questions to Venerable Tamat Chayo. His third question: what deeds did Steve Jobs commit to die of pancreatic cancer at the age of 56? The Venerable says this is an interesting question in regards to the law of karma that should be researched. This is an individual who was accomplished in many ways. He was good-looking, smart, fortunate, successful, rich, an innovator, a leader, but yet unfortunate in that cancer took his life at the age of 56. It is interesting indeed to learn about Steve Jobs' case. Before I answer, let's build a little foundation. Everyone, regardless of race and creed, have undergone the round of rebirth and death, not just once, but for countless times. It is a universal phenomenon that is a fact of life, which everyone must know. Ignorance of the round of rebirth is dangerous and can jeopardize one's life by causing one to fall prey to the dictates of one's defilements. The belief about this plane of existence and the next plane of existence and about life in the hereafter, the belief that death is not annihilation, but that death leads to rebirth. These beliefs are key to how we will live this life and how it will impact our next and future existences. One's beliefs determine if one will have a life of mostly happiness or suffering. The reason is our beliefs influence our deeds, and our deeds determine our lives. All beings are conditioned by their overall karma. We reap what we sow. If we do good deeds, we receive happiness as their consequences. If we commit bad deeds, we receive suffering as their consequences. Therefore, all of our actions, defined as physical, verbal, and mental deeds that we have accumulated in previous lives, whether it is good or bad, whether it is intentional or unintentional, frequent or infrequent, will eventually bear its fruit with the correlating consequence. The law of karma is absolutely exact, and no one is exempt from it. Rebirth will not end until our defilements can be completely destroyed. Although all living beings have been reborn countless numbers of times, no one can recall their past misdeeds. Avijja, the Pali word for ignorance, serves as a thick veil that hides such knowledge from us. As a result, all of us are at the mercy of our own past overall merit and demerit, as well as the environment which we are born, since the way karma sends forth its consequences is highly complex. Whether we meet with happiness or unhappiness in this lifetime is not dependent solely on our current karma. At any point in time, we are affected by our overall karma, which includes all of our accumulated karma throughout our countless lifetimes, as well as our current karma, or all the deeds that we have performed in the current lifetime. Steve Jobs succeeded in his life from the good deeds that he accumulated throughout his lifetimes, as we discussed in previous episodes. Although he was exceptionally successful, he battled with pancreatic cancer and died at the age of only 56 years, though the average life expectancy in modern times is 75. Interesting indeed to find out why this happened to Steve Jobs, says Venerable Tamat Chayo. Let's come and see the reason why Steve Jobs passed away at the age of 56. This had to do with the comma of killing, which was an act that was unintentionally performed by Steve Jobs in one of his previous lives, many lifetimes ago. Keep in mind, overall wholesome and unwholesome karma follows us everywhere like a shadow, waiting for the opportunity to show up in our lives. Let's revisit this lifetime of Steve Jobs and examine the karma that he committed. He was born into a good family, a middle-class family that owned and operated a small trading business. The world in this particular era is one of high technology and innovation and is forward-thinking, similar to how it is in our modern era. They had cars, planes, and advanced technology, with phones being a main form of communication. The Venerable goes on to say that there's really nothing new that hasn't already been invented in our countless world cycles. In addition, this particular era also had a dissemination of Buddha's teaching. However, at this time, it was broken up into many schools, and the teachings of the particular Buddha in this era was fading away from the world. In this particular era, human morality has declined. There is an epidemic of crimes. Many people have no conscience and lack shame from bad deeds and do not believe in consequences of their actions. The rich exploit and take advantage of the poor, and the poor continue to struggle even more. People have to look out for themselves and struggle even more to survive. People do not respect and obey the law. Many take on unwholesome jobs as a career, such as selling of weapons, selling of drugs. Actually, during this era, drugs are actually legalized and can be found at retailers. This is a dark period for human morale. War between regions are common. The economy is poor, and the majority of society is plagued with misery. People are also suffering from starvation. Monks who take refuge in the Triple Gem and the teachings of the Buddha during this era, who are serious about their practice, will retreat and practice in the forests, where they will find solace away from the chaos of this dark period. City monks who remain behind will interject their own beliefs into Buddhism and add their own influence into the teachings of the Buddha, and no longer practice the orthodox way, so there will be many, many schools. Though Steve Jobs was born in an era of human existence where people are corrupt, and during this dark period of human morale, Steve Jobs is a good-natured person who loves his family. He is a Buddhist in this life, though not practicing, and he is a hard worker. During his adolescent years, closer to the age of 20, Steve Jobs' father passes away. His father was the main provider of the family. As a result, they struggled financially, doing their best to survive. After the passing of his father, his oldest brother took the responsibility of the family trading business, in which Steve Jobs assisted and worked diligently in the family business. The family business was able to maintain their livelihood. Sometimes they sold a lot, other times not so much. Time passes by. Steve Jobs' brother falls ill with a digestive problem concerning his liver. As soon as this happens, Steve Jobs comes to the aid of his brother and is determined to help take care of him. Steve Jobs loved his brother dearly. His older brother took on the role of caretaker of the family, protector of the family, so he would do everything in his power and was determined to find a way to nurse his brother to good health. During this time, Steve Jobs was naive to the working of the corrupt world. He did not have experience dealing with society as much and trusted others easily. He also did not have a lot of money. As a result, he chose to seek the help of an alternative doctor who was inexpensive, but promised that he could help his brother. This alternative doctor was someone that he was familiar with, however, did not have certification as a doctor, but did have some experience. The alternative doctor took advantage of the opportunity and prescribed Steve Jobs' brother with medicine that was a placebo, but yet charged Steve Jobs a lot of money for the medicine to give to his brother. Even though this alternative doctor knew Steve Jobs and his family, he took the opportunity to take advantage of the situation. Keep in mind, this is a time when human morals and principles are quite corrupt. Steve Jobs trusted the alternative doctor and quickly found the money to pay for his brother's medicine. Instead of his brother having better health, his brother's condition got worse until his brother almost died. When Steve Jobs realized that his brother's condition was getting worse, he started to question the alternative doctor's medicine and the alternative doctor's promises, which was that his brother would get better. He soon realized that he was tricked. Steve Jobs was very, very angry and gathered a few of his friends to pay a visit to the alternative doctor. They beat up the alternative doctor for his injustice of selling fake medicine to Steve Jobs and causing his brother's condition to worsen. Steve Jobs was angry and vengeful for this wrongdoing. He demanded the alternative doctor tell him how to help his brother. The alternative doctor told Steve Jobs that he didn't have the experience to help his brother, but he knew of a reputable doctor who could. However, it would be very expensive, and the doctor was in another city. The Venerable jokes to the audience that the answer that Steve Jobs is asking the alternative doctor is in his consciousness. However, they must massage his physical body first in order to get the answer. The audience laughs. Steve Jobs demanded his money back from the alternative doctor. Since the alternative doctor was unable to help his condition and made his brother's condition worse, instead of the alternative doctor having any remorse for what he did and wanting to return the money, he actually hesitated and tried to swindle his way from returning the money. As a result of his reluctance and refusal, Steve Jobs and his friends beat him up again. Soon the alternative doctor agreed to pay Steve Jobs' money back. In all honesty, Steve Jobs did not want to hurt anyone. He was a good-natured person and a kind individual. However, when he got tricked, it was necessary. After receiving his money back, he rushed over to the real doctor who was able to help him in his situation with his brother, and who would have the ability to help nurse his brother to good health. When the real doctor examined Steve Jobs' brother, he explained that his brother was in dire health and would need surgery. This surgery is at a very high cost to perform. His liver would need to be replaced and they would need a donor. Steve Jobs agreed that he would be the donor and would give half of his liver to his brother. He did not have enough money to pay for the cost of the surgery, so he had to sell off all business assets to come up with the money for the surgery to save his brother's life. The Venerable says, during this era, it is also common to replace organs if needed. The healthcare is advanced, similar to how it is in our current era. The Venerable goes on to say nothing is really new. It all goes in a circle. So Steve Jobs comes up with the money by selling all assets that he and his family owns, and he sacrifices half of his liver for his brother's surgery. After the surgery, Steve Jobs' brother's conditions slowly gets better and he survives. Now back to the alternative doctor who tricked Steve Jobs. Recall that Steve Jobs and some of his friends paid a visit to the alternative doctor to seek revenge for his manipulation in selling placebo medicine to Steve Jobs for his brother to take, which actually made his brother's condition worse. The alternative doctor got beat up pretty badly and actually suffered internal bleeding from that incident and died. The internal bleeding suffered by the alternative doctor was the result of Steve Jobs' knee, which he jabbed into the stomach of the alternative doctor. This force traveled inside and tore the alternative doctor's liver. As a result, the alternative doctor suffered from internal bleeding and died. The karma from killing, let's not forget here that we are studying to learn from the law of karma, the cause and effects of why certain things happen in our current life from past deeds, says the Venerable. In this situation, why Steve Jobs developed pancreatic cancer and lost his life. This is what we are studying right now, and we are now becoming familiar with the consequences of his past actions. The karma of killing the alternative doctor that Steve Jobs committed in this particular lifetime, though it was unintentional, coupled with the remnants of the karma of giving his brother medicine that only made his condition worse and almost caused him to lose his life, though that was unintentional as well. These deeds in every lifetime since have followed Steve Jobs like a shadow that lingers around, waiting to bring forth its consequences. These particular deeds have been following him for many lifetimes already. In some lifetimes, this negative karma bears its consequences and is able to interject on any of the good deeds performed by Steve Jobs in previous lives. When that happens, he will pass away with a grave illness, generally in his digestive system, similar to the situation for Steve Jobs in this life. In some lives, though, the bad karma comes to bear its consequences, but good karma is also present as well. In such instances, he will still suffer an illness dealing with his digestive system, but his illness will be treatable. Then there are also lives that only good karma sends its consequences, and the bad karma has yet to catch up with him, and he suffers from no illnesses. There are probably many students wondering why there are remnants of bad karma that came into Steve Jobs' life, though his intentions were really good to help his brother. If you consider the law of karma, says the Venerable, all actions, physical, verbal, mental, good or bad, intentional or unintentional, all have its consequences. That is what the law of karma is. It might not seem fair, but it is exact. The Buddha discovered the law of karma and taught us he's not the one who controls this universal phenomenon. We are all under the law of karma. The weight of the overall good and bad karma that will follow us is determined by the intentions of the act. If you have intentions to do bad deeds, then the karma that follows is more forceful than a deed performed unintentionally. If you have no intentions at all, the consequences of this action will be remnants of karma, but regardless, it still waits to bear its consequences when it is able. In Steve Jobs' current life, the bad karma bared its consequences, and he almost died the very first time. However, the fact that he gave half his liver to his brother in previous lives, many lifetimes ago, in return, in this life, when he almost passed away, he had a donor for his liver, and as a result, his surgery was successful initially. However, the bad karma that he had committed many lifetimes ago was a powerful force, and that is why the pancreatic cancer came back, and this time it took his life. That is why samsara is so dangerous, says the Venerable. Now that you know this, it is best that you only perform good deeds, because you never know. Karma and its consequences are unthinkable and cannot be explained using human intellect alone. The reason is the law of karma is highly complex and cannot be directly witnessed by the human eye or understood by postulating or theorizing. The workings of the law of karma can only be witnessed using the Tama eye. The Tama eye allows one to perceive clearly the past, the present, the future, and how each living being is propelled along by its overall karma. The Buddha had this to say about the law of karma. The fruits of karma are unthinkable. Anyone who tries to think about them risks going insane. Our overall wholesome and unwholesome karma follows us everywhere like a shadow. As long as one still possesses defilements, one will continue to perform both good and bad deeds and receive their consequences. An individual's karma and its consequences follow him like a shadow, and it is only a matter of time before the consequences show up. We must study about the law of karma and understand that our life is the complex manifestation of the consequences of our overall past and present karma. The workings of the law of karma are highly complex and cannot be reasoned with mere intellect, but can only be witnessed via the threefold knowledge attained as a result of elevated meditative attainments. The Buddha taught all living beings to know the root causes of karma so that karma can be extinguished at its source. The Buddha taught us to cure our greed by giving alms, to cure our anger by cultivating loving kindness and observing the precepts, to cure our ignorance by practicing analytical reflection of the causes and effects, by practicing creative thinking, by right thinking, so that our greed, anger, and ignorance can be reduced, by being motivated to perform good deeds and practice meditation. These practices allow the source of unwholesomeness to be destroyed.